Hello, everybody. Here we are again. I'm going to continue reading the book, Planting Churches That Reproduce. So thank you for being with me, particularly our church, who this is getting us ready for our retreat. So we're reading section 1, chapter 1. The last time I just read the introduction. So now here we are. Chapter 1, entitled Life in the Desert. In the summer of 2008, our family drove through the hot, dry desert of California and Arizona on our way to Colorado. I witnessed mile after mile of dry wasteland. At times, I spotted an old sign that marked the failed attempt of a restaurant, gas station, or motel. The desert has special meaning to me because I live in one. Moreno Valley, where I live, would be one of those run-down ghost towns if it weren't for the constant fight of humans to push back the desert realities. In Moreno Valley, it's common for the temperature to soar to over 105 degrees. The hot, dry air not only affects people negatively, it does weird things to plant life. I've noticed every imaginable type of weed coming up out of nowhere. But trying to keep real grass on my lawn takes persistent effort. Many homeowners have decided to just water the weeds, giving up trying to maintain real grass. Each fall, I've come to accept that I'll have to replant entire swaths of grass. I've often compared my weed problem in Moreno Valley to Christ's church. Churches also live in a hostile environment. The world, the flesh, and the devil pound against Christ's church, seeking to annihilate it. Without fresh leadership and evangelistic outreach, the natural tendency is stagnation, decline, and eventual death. Church planting also keeps churches healthy and strong. Birthing new churches pushes back the encroaching desert and forms an oasis in the dryness. To stay healthy and fresh, churches need to plant churches that plant churches. Plant or perish. God has blessed America with the gospel since the English Puritans immigrated in the early 17th century. Since those initial seeds, churches have blossomed, and many call America a Christian nation. The tendency of many is to think, the church is already established in America. Why would we need to plant more churches? The fact is that Christianity is rapidly declining in America. David Olson, a cutting-edge researcher, wrote the book, The Crisis of the American Church in 2008. He used data of actual church attendance to show that 17.7% of the American population attended church on any given weekend in 2004, and that established churches showed 0% growth. The one bright spot was church planting. Church plants added an increase of 7.8%. Olson explains that no time in American history has the need for churches been more critical. New church planters are needed now to scale back the decline and death of existing churches. In order to survive, Christ's church must be replanted in every generation. Whenever I minister in Europe, I see where America is headed. Secularism gone astray and church buildings without pulsating life of vibrant congregations. The story of the church in Europe over many centuries can best be understood as successive waves of ecclesiastical renewal, followed by periods of stagnation. Church planting movements were frequently the catalysts of renewal, but church planting was generally resisted by existing churches or regarded as extraordinary. When will a church be ready to plant a daughter? Most likely, the church will never feel ready. The perception among most churches is that they're not big enough at their present size, no matter what size it is. The same mindset affects the church in other areas as well. A church doesn't have quite enough finances to start a new church this year, so it decides to wait until next year or the next year after. Decades later, church planting becomes the great idea back then. The reality is that the ideal number of people and finances will always be perceived as being larger than what the church presently has. Instead of waiting for that perfect day to arrive, churches need to change their priorities now. Multiplication is high on God's desire list. The multiplication of leaders, groups, and churches. The bursting forth of God's Spirit cannot be contained. The Spirit often hovers over churches that convert intention into reality. One such example is Dove Christian Fellowship. Larry Kreider never intended to start Dove Christian Fellowship back in the late 70s. Kreider figured he'd fill up existing churches with the vanloads of young people he and others won to Christ. Yet the young people never felt integrated in those existing churches. Kreider yielded to God's call on his life and in 1980 started Dove, an acronym for Declaring Our Victory Emmanuel. From a small, humble beginning, the church grew to 2,000 people in 10 years. The congregation spread itself over a 7-county area of Pennsylvania. Leading a megachurch would be a dream come true for most pastors. Kreider, however, realized that his megachurch was too complicated and cumbersome. It needed an injection of simplicity and reproducibility. It wasn't nimble enough to adjust quickly and raise up new generations of leaders. Kreider writes, "If we wanted to build the church, we would have to give the church away. Therefore, that is exactly what we did with our church. Giving our church away better suited our vision of a cell-based church planting movement intent on training a new generation of church planters and leaders. Our church in South Central Pennsylvania became 8 individual churches, each with its own eldership team. We formed an apostolic council to give oversight to all the churches of DCFI. Then we gave each of the 8 celebrations the freedom to become autonomous. They had the option of joining with the DCFI family of churches or connecting to another part of the body of Christ. The church has been giving itself away ever since. Dove's commitment is simple. Reproducible church planting is evident in its new openness to planting house church networks. Kreider's new book, Starting a House Church, reflects his innovative, forward-looking thinking. Dove continues to plant cell-based churches and now has planted approximately 100 churches. Growing to survive. Cactus is a staple of the desert. It flourishes in a dry, hot environment. Cactus, unlike any other plant, can absorb up to 800 gallons of water in just a few days. Only 2 hours after rain, the formation of new roots help absorb large quantities of water. Because of this innate ability, cactus can survive and flourish in the suffocating desert. Church plants, like cactus, learn to survive in desolate environments. They learn to adjust their strategies to overcome harsh realities. Many larger churches don't have this same earnestness. Bob Roberts Jr., senior pastor of Northwood Church in Texas, has planted 100 some churches. In his book, The Multiplying Church, he writes, "On more than one occasion, I've found myself in a group of megachurch pastors who make a statement like this: 'We need to partner to start some significant churches. We don't need to waste our time on these little churches of 100 or 200. They don't get it.' I try to educate them, but more often than not, to no avail. When they make a statement like that, they miss 2 things. First, they don't know their history. Where faith has exploded, it has never been because of the multiplication of megachurches, but of smaller churches from 50 to 200. Secondly, they don't understand the nature of movements. Movements are personal and viral. When movements have emerged, it hasn't been because of the large, but because of the small. Church plants need new people, new ideas, and a new vision if they are going to emerge out of the darkness into the sunlight. Established churches tend to be more concerned about building upkeep, the personality of the preacher, who's on the board, and the program schedule for the upcoming year. Established agendas and traditions shield long-established churches from realizing that they too live in the desert. Often when reality of the desert sinks in, it's too late. But church plants are completely stripped of all illusions. It's do or die. Reach out or close the doors. Invite or implode. Church planters are desperate for growth. Without growth, the church folds. This reality keeps church planters on their knees crying out to God. Unless church plants organize around evangelism, no one will show up. After all, most Christians would rather worship in a full service where their needs are met. Few modern-day Christians with families are willing to join a new church where program ministries don't exist. In survival mode, church plants must exercise their muscles, and as a result, they become healthy and vibrant. Christian Schwartz, in Natural Church Development, reveals that church plants are more effective in every area, leading people to become Christ followers, baptizing members, and ministering to needs. He writes, instead of a single church with 2,856 in worship, we had 56 churches, each with 51 worshipers. These churches would statistically win 1,792 new people within 5 years. 16 times the number that the megachurch would win. Thus we conclude that the evangelistic effectiveness of many churches is statistically 1,600% greater than that of megachurches. Struggling to start a new church does wonders for church planters. They are developed and honed in the crucible of church planting. Church planting has helped me to grow in my relationship with Jesus more than any other ministry I've been involved in. I look back at my first church plant in 1983. I was a single pastor, fresh out of seminary and looking for my first pastorate. My ultimate goal was to be a career missionary with the Christian Missionary Alliance. I had something to prove. The CMA asks potential career missionaries to test themselves at home before ministering overseas. As a general rule, they know from experience that those who aren't fruitful here won't make it over there. Crossing an ocean does not change ministry effectiveness. At that time, I was tired from learning about ministry in school. I also had spent several years as an intern and an associate pastor. The CMA probably would have approved an associate position, but deep down inside, I would have been bored. I needed a new challenge. I had to get out of the classroom in the church building. What did I believe? What was my ministry philosophy? I could repeat the philosophies of other great ministers and get an A on the exam, but I had not created my own ministry from scratch. At that time, the CMA was reclaiming the inner cities of America for Jesus. They even offered some money for church planting in the inner city. I volunteered to plant a church that I called Hope Alliance in the heart of downtown Long Beach. The two words that best describe my 5-year church planting experience in downtown Long Beach are total engagement. Another phrase might be stretched beyond measure. As a single pastor, I had to marry, bury, and everything else. Hope Alliance Church didn't exist. I had to discover those who would be a part of it. The meeting place didn't exist. I had to find it. My ministry method was unknown. I had to determine it. My relationship with God grew to new heights because I was so totally dependent on God's guidance for every step of the journey. My seminary knowledge faded quickly in the dark realities of inner city life. I felt like the token white person among an ethnic sea. Most of my parishioners had drug backgrounds, which tempted them to fall away when government checks were issued at the end of the month. I met my wife, Chelsea, 4 years into the plant, and we were married on February 13th, 1988. We returned from honeymooning in Hawaii and settled into our rented house, which was a Grand Station for the church plant, which was Grand Central Station for the church plant. The same night, we received a 3 a.m. phone call from one of the members demanding urgent counseling. Welcome back. As I struggled to plant Hope Alliance Church in downtown Long Beach, God molded and shaped me more than I had the church. He showed me that He truly was faithful. Out of the doubt and discouragement, He was able to grow something lovely. He also prepared me for the cultural rigors of missionary life in Ecuador. So that's the first part of chapter 1. I'm going to stop there, and then I'll read the next part in the next video. That way this is not too long for you, and you can follow along. Some really interesting stuff here. We'll be able to discuss it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about it with you. Thank you for listening. Tune in for the next part of chapter 1.